Next, we have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Nader, an assistant professor of research at Weill Cornell Medicine in Qatar.
I click this.
With a master's and PhD from France and the USA, followed by postdoctoral training, Dr. Nader's work focuses on the molecular regulation of hormones. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Nader and her talk, How Fertility Research Turns Sweet.
Good evening. Tonight I want to share with you a short personal story about how my research in the field of fertility led us to rethink a potential treatment for diabetes, is when you have a high level of sugar in your blood, which can lead to very serious health problem. Let's start with fertility. You all heard about the famous egg that meets the strongest and the fastest sperm. They fuse together, we start life. They start dividing, we have an embryo, then the fetus, then a beautiful and very noisy baby. But this egg, before becoming very responsible, like all of us from childhood to adulthood, needs to mature. It starts like an oocyte, and it goes through a process called oocyte maturation and becomes responsible. And no, it doesn't need a lot of emotion processing or communication. It needs chemical signals. And in the lab, we study these chemical signals. And because we cannot work with human oocytes for obvious reason, we use oocytes from frog. And what we know, if we add this hormone called progesterone, that we all have it in our body, it needs to bind to a very special receptor called the membrane progesterone receptor. Membrane, because it's on the membrane of the oocytes, progesterone, because it's binding to this hormone, and receptor, because it's receiving. So this is the first signal for the oocyte to tell you stop playing, you need to mature, become egg, and become responsible. We're scientists, we don't stop there. We ask questions. What next? It takes a village to raise a child, right? So it takes more than that on the molecular and cellular level. So we kept doing some experiments and research to see what's happening after that. And we uncovered these two important candidates. I call them Team AA for APPL1 and AKT2. They are needed to help progesterone and the membrane progesterone receptor in this process. We didn't know much about them in the fertility world. So we went to the library of the National Institute of Health, not on TikTok, not on Thread, not on Instagram, to see what are these proteins doing. And surprisingly, we got more than 400 hits about these two candidates in the field of diabetes and insulin. So just like a backup about insulin, this famous hormone. So usually when we take a meal, we have an increase of glucose in our blood. And then this is going to be sensed by our pancreas. It's going to secrete this famous hormone, which is called insulin. And what insulin does, it's going to bind to its receptor, the insulin receptor, in different tissues, mainly the muscle and the liver. And it's going to send the signal to a door in our cells, tell them you have to open and let glucose in. We need to lower glucose level in the bloodstream. And that's how we regulate glucose level. We call it glucose homeostasis. And guess who helps this receptor? Team AA. They are very important when it comes to mediate the effect of insulin. And usually, in diabetes, people usually have a constant high level of glucose genetically or because of food intake, obesity. This receptor is functioning all the time, so it's burned out. So we will have insulin, but it's not functioning. So this is when we call insulin resistance. So this is where we stopped and we said, if we have Team AA under the insulin receptor, and in the case of diabetes, the receptor is not functioning, can we replace it with our membrane progesterone receptor since it uses the same team? And this is how it makes us think, so is our study from fertility, can we rethink it? And maybe by targeting this receptor, can we regulate glucose homeostasis? And if so, can it be a potential treatment for diabetes? And you might have think, there's so much treatment. You all heard about Ozempic now. They are very famous. Mounjaro, we have metformin, we have surgeries. But if you ask the clinician, only 50% of the patient are responsive. So we still need to do more work as researchers to uncover new treatment. So what we did next, it was a very straightforward experiment. We took beautiful mice, we put them on a McDonald's diet, 60% fat, and they became obese and hyperglycemic, and then we switched them into two groups. One group took a vehicle solution, what we called placebo. It doesn't have any treatment. And the second group took a chemical compound that's gonna target our membrane-processing receptor specifically. We gave them the treatment for 28 days, and at the end of the treatment, we measured their glucose level. And what we found, when they were lean, before, like the high-fat diet, they had a normal glucose level. Then we put them on the high-fat diet, and then their glucose level shoot. After the treatment, as you can see, the one who took the compound that's gonna target our membrane-processing receptor, their glucose level went down, and it regulates. Where the one who took the placebo, they still had a very high level of glucose. And I think the take-home message is that, yes, by rethinking this, NPR can be a potential treatment to regulate glucose homeostasis and diabetes. And not being cheesy, I think the take-home message is don't be afraid of asking questions and seeking answers, doing research and experiment. And once you got these, responses, to think again and think outside of the box. So maybe you can connect two things that are very important. And that's it. Thank you.